The morning Jack Warren Delahaye realized his wife had been counting the days until his death, he was sitting on a plastic stool at a bun cha stand 2 blocks from the guest house he had paid to renovate, holding a phone with a translated text message on the screen, and the smell of grilled pork was making him sick for the first time in his life. This is a message from a viewer named Jack, a 68-year-old retired union electrician from Yonkers, New York, who spent 39 years climbing high-rise skeletons in Manhattan, who buried both parents in the same 18-month stretch, and who sold the only house he had ever really loved because a friend at the American Legion told him a man could live like a king on a beach in Vietnam. Jack is not the kind of man you would expect to fall for anything. He fixed his own boiler at 65. He does arithmetic in his head faster than most people do it on a phone. He served 3 years in the Marines before he ever picked up a union card. And yet, 5 years after he stepped off a plane in Nha Trang on a scouting trip he told his daughter would last 2 weeks, he was sitting on that plastic stool with a return ticket in his pocket, roughly $40,000 to his name, and a marriage certificate that Vietnamese law had just quietly reminded him meant almost nothing. What happened to Jack in those 5 years is not the story of a man swindled by a stranger. It is something stranger and more painful than that. It is a story of a life gently, patiently, almost tenderly disassembled by someone who called him my engineer and meant something else entirely. If you have ever wondered how a smart, careful, blue-collar man can end up broke in a foreign country at 68, this is the answer, and it will not sound the way you expect. If you've been enjoying the stories I tell, please consider hitting the subscribe button. Your support is crucial for the growth of this channel and helps me dedicate time to making these videos despite my commitment to a full-time job. Thank you for being here. I want to start with the kitchen, because if you understand the kitchen, you understand everything else. My parents bought the house in Yonkers in 1968, the year I turned 12. 3 bedrooms, a colonial with green shutters, a driveway just wide enough for 1 car if you folded in the mirrors. Park Hill neighborhood, a 5-minute walk to the Metro North if you knew the shortcut through the alley behind the Greek church. My father was an electrician too, Local 3 like me, and he bought that house with a VA loan and the overtime from a job at the World Trade Center site when they were still pouring the foundations of the towers. My mother put yellow wallpaper in the kitchen the week they moved in. That wallpaper was still on the wall the day I signed the papers to sell the place in early 2021. I'd painted every other room in that house twice over the years, but I could never bring myself to touch the yellow wallpaper. It was faded by then. There were grease marks near the stove from a lifetime of my mother's Sunday sauce. When the realtor walked through, she wrinkled her nose and said the buyers would rip it out first thing. I nodded and did not say anything, because what was there to say? My mother had died in that kitchen in 2018, and my father had died in a hospital bed in the living room in 2019, and the wallpaper was going to outlive us all until it didn't. I tell you this because I want you to understand that when I sold that house, I was not selling a piece of real estate. I was selling the last physical fact of the people who made me. My sister had moved to Arizona in the 90s and told me on the phone that whatever I did was fine with her, just send her half of what was left after the mortgage. My daughter Emma, who was 34 at the time and living up in White Plains with her husband and my 2 grandsons, told me I did not have to sell it, that I could live in it for the rest of my life if I wanted. She said this in a careful voice that I now understand was a voice she had rehearsed. She had already talked to her husband about whether I was okay. I was not okay. I was 65 years old. I had just retired from 39 years in the union. My best friend Tommy from the local had dropped dead of a heart attack in the parking lot of the Colonial Diner in Pelham 8 months before my father died. And I was sitting alone in a house that had become a museum for people who were not coming back. I would wake up at 4 in the morning out of habit, and there would be no reason to be awake at 4 in the morning. I would make coffee in a machine that had been made for 2 people and drink it in the yellow kitchen and listen to the boiler I had rebuilt the year before, and I would think, this is what the rest of my life sounds like. And I would go back upstairs and try to sleep, and I would fail. That is the state I was in when Kevin Ashby, a guy from the Legion Post over on McLean Avenue, invited me to a Sunday afternoon barbecue at his place in Bronxville and showed me pictures of a beach on his phone. Kevin was 10 years younger than me, a plumber, married to a woman from a place in Vietnam called Con Tho that I had never heard of, His wife was in the kitchen with the other wives, and Kevin was standing next to the grill with a beer in one hand and his phone in the other. And he was scrolling through photographs of white sand and blue water and grilled fish laid out on banana leaves. He told me a man could live in a place called Nha Trang on a pension like mine and never work another day and eat like a king. He told me the seafood was cheaper than a slice of pizza at Louie and Ernie's in the Bronx, and he said it 3 times, because in his mind that was the argument that won any argument. He said the women there still treated a man like a man, which I did not know what to do with then, and I did not know what to do with it later either, though by then it was too late. I flew to Nha Trang in early 2020. Emma took me to the airport. She hugged me and said, "Dad, just have a good time and come home." I told her I would be back in 2 weeks. I meant it when I said it. I met her on the 6th day. There was a small cafe near the Po Nagar Towers, an old sham temple complex on a hill above a bridge north of the main tourist strip. I had walked up to the towers in the morning because Kevin had said they were worth seeing, and on the way back down I stopped at this cafe because my knee was hurting from the stairs. It was a narrow place with 3 tables and a ceiling fan that did not quite work. She was sitting at the table by the window, reading a paperback novel in English. I noticed it because I had not seen anyone reading a book in English since I got off the plane. She looked up when I sat down and smiled a small, apologetic smile, the way you might smile at a stranger in a doctor's waiting room, and she went back to her book. I ordered a Vietnamese coffee, which I had already learned was the strongest thing I had ever drunk in my life, and I sat there and drank it, and I looked at the book she was reading. It was a Nicholas Sparks novel. I do not remember which one. I remember that I said, without planning to, that my wife had liked those books, and she looked up and said, in careful, steady English with an accent I could not place, "You are married?" And I said, "No. I was divorced a long time ago, and my ex-wife had liked those books." And she smiled again, a slightly different smile, and she said her English was not very good and she was sorry, and I told her her English was beautiful, which was the truth. Her name, she said, was Dorothea Cum Van, but her cousins in California called her Vanny. She said she was 38. I found out much later that she was 43. But I did not know that then, and even now the age itself is not what bothers me. What bothers me is that she had cousins in California who did not exist, and she said it with the same tone she used to tell me the coffee was strong, and I believed her about both things equally. She told me, over the course of an hour, that she was a widow, that her husband had been an engineer who died in a motorbike accident on Highway 1 when she was 31, that she ran a small 4-room guest house in a quieter part of the city called Vietnamese High, that she took care of her elderly mother out in Dien Con district, where the rice paddies are, and that she was helping raise a niece because the niece's mother, her sister, had been married off to a man in Taiwan and could not care for the child properly. She said all of this without complaint, in the flat, factual voice of a woman who had been carrying weight for a long time and did not think of the weight as remarkable anymore. That voice, I will tell you now, was the single most effective thing anyone has ever done to me in my life. If she had cried, I would have been suspicious. If she had asked for anything, I would have been suspicious. She did not cry, and she did not ask for anything. She finished her tea, she paid for her own tea before I could offer, and she gave me the name of her guest house in case I ever needed a room away from the tourist strip, and she left. I sat there for another 20 minutes after she was gone. I moved into her guest house the next afternoon. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds. I did not move in with her. I rented a room. The room was clean and small and had a window that looked out onto a courtyard with a lemon tree, and it cost the equivalent of $18 a night, and I paid a week in advance. She was at the front desk when I arrived, and she looked genuinely surprised to see me, and then she looked pleased in a way she tried to hide. And that small, failed effort to hide the pleasure was the second thing that undid me. I did not know then that she practiced that expression. I thought I was watching a private moment. She was letting me watch it. The next 6 days I did what a lonely man does in a beach town, when a beautiful, self-contained woman is running the front desk of the small guest house he is living in. I found reasons to walk past the desk. I asked her about restaurants. I asked her about the local temple. I asked her, on the 5th day, if she would show me the seafood market at Vietnamese High Beach, and she said she could not, she was working, but her brother Khan could take me. and she would tell him to take me for free. That was how I met Dormin Khan, her younger brother, 29 years old, thin as a rail, with a gambler's quick eyes. I did not know how to read yet. He took me to the market. He would not let me pay for the taxi. He said in broken English that his sister was a good woman and I was a good man, and it was his pleasure. I gave him $20 anyway, and he took it, and he did not say thank you, and I liked him for that. On my 13th day in Nha Trang, I called Emma from the guest house courtyard and told her I was going to stay another 2 weeks. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Okay, Dad," and asked me if I was eating enough. I said I was eating better than I had eaten in 20 years, which was also the truth. On my 27th day, when I was supposed to be on a plane home, I was instead sitting on a low wall by the water at Hon Chung, a jumble of huge stones the ocean throws itself against on the north end of the city. And I was watching Vanny in a pale blue dress walking barefoot in the sand below me, and I understood that I was not going back to the yellow kitchen. I did not tell her that. I did not tell anyone that. I got on the plane home 3 days later because my return ticket had a fixed date, and I flew back to New York, and I walked into the empty house in Park Hill, and I sat down in the yellow kitchen at 10 o'clock at night with the bag from the airport still by the front door, and I understood the same thing again, with more force this time. I called Emma the next morning and told her I was thinking of selling the house. She was quiet for a much longer moment than the last time. Then she said, "Okay, Dad," and she did not ask me if I was eating enough. The pandemic hit 6 weeks later. The world closed. For most people, this was a catastrophe. For me, it was a strange kind of gift, because it meant that the decision I'd already made in my head had to wait to be made in real life, and I had almost a full year to sit with it and let it either dissolve or harden. I want you to understand, I had that year. I could have changed my mind. Nobody was in the room with me. There was no one whispering in my ear. The manipulation, if you want to call it that, happened at a distance of 8,000 miles in nightly video calls that lasted an hour and sometimes 2. In voice notes she sent me of the ocean at dawn in Nha Trang, in photographs of a bowl of pho she had made from her mother's recipe and set at the empty seat across from her at the guest house breakfast table. She never asked for money in that entire year. Not once. She asked me about my day. She asked me what the yellow wallpaper looked like. She asked me if my knee was bothering me. She told me her mother had lit a candle for me at the Nha Trang Cathedral, and she sent me a photograph of the candle. The candle was real. Her mother was real. The cathedral was real. What was not real was the shape of the story those real things were arranged into. I sold the house in the early spring of 2021. $640,000. I paid off the small remaining mortgage. I wired my sister her share, and I was left with just under $480,000, which is more money than I had ever held in my life, and which felt, that first evening in the empty house with the walls stripped and the sold sign already in the yard, like a betrayal of my parents that I would have to spend the rest of my life earning forgiveness for. Emma came over. She sat with me on the floor of what had been my parents' bedroom, because the furniture was already gone. She did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Dad, whatever you do over there, please keep some of that money separate, in an account here, in your name only, please." I told her I would. I meant it when I said it. I flew to Nha Trang in April of 2021 with 2 suitcases and a laptop and a bank draft I had gotten from my bank in Yonkers. Vanny met me at Cam Ranh Airport in a taxi she had hired for the whole day. She was wearing the pale blue dress. She had cut her hair. She cried when she saw me, a quiet crying she tried to hide against my shoulder, and I held her in the arrivals hall of an airport in a country I had barely visited, and I thought, I am home. I want you to hear me when I say I really did think that. I was not lying to myself. That is the part of this that took me the longest to accept. We were married 3 months later at the Nha Trang Cathedral, a big, yellow-painted French colonial church with 2 spires you can see from most of the city. It was a small ceremony. Her mother came, in a traditional ao dai the color of a peach. Her brother Khan came in a suit that did not fit him. 2 of her friends from the guest house came. A priest performed the mass. Emma did not come. I had told her over the phone about the wedding 2 weeks in advance, and she had said, "Dad, I love you. I cannot come to this." And I had said I understood, and I did understand. But understanding did not stop me from noticing the empty seat where my daughter should have been. Vanny noticed too. She squeezed my hand during the vows and did not mention it once, ever, in the years that followed. That silence about my daughter at the time felt like a mercy. I understand it now differently. She was not going to give my daughter any traction in our marriage. She was already isolating me, and she was doing it by being kind about the isolation. The marriage was registered legally in Vietnam. The certificate is in a drawer in my daughter's basement now. It is a real document. It means I have since learned almost nothing for the purposes of what would happen to my money. But it is real. I moved out of the small rented room and into the private apartment on the top floor of the guest house. The apartment had 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, a balcony that looked out over a lane of tin-roofed houses, and past them, a strip of the ocean, if you leaned out far enough. It was ours, she said. Our home. I want you to notice the word ours. I did notice it at the time. I noticed it and I felt warm about it. I did not ask her whose name was on the lease of the guest house. I did not ask her whose name was on the deed. I asked her instead whether she wanted me to help fix the wiring in the second-floor rooms, which she had told me was old and unsafe, and she smiled and touched my face and said, "My engineer." That was the first time she called me that. She would call me that for the next 4 years, and every time she said it, I felt like the man my father had trained me to be. The renovation began in the autumn of that year. She did not propose it as a renovation. She proposed it as a conversation. We were sitting on the balcony one evening with a bottle of the local beer, and she was saying that the guest house only ever broke even, that the 4 rooms downstairs were tired, that if she could add 2 more rooms on a 3rd floor and improve the bathrooms and put in a proper little breakfast area on the ground floor, she could double the income, and we could live on that income together, and my pension could just sit in the bank and grow, and we could travel, and we could visit Emma, and we could go to see her sister in Taiwan, and we could grow old on a beach and not worry. She said all of this in the same flat, factual voice she had used at the cafe near the Ponagar Towers, and it landed in me the same way. She was not selling me anything. She was thinking out loud about our future, and she was letting me hear her think. I asked her what it would cost. She said she did not know exactly. She said she would need to get quotes. She said she would sell some of her mother's jewelry to contribute. I told her not to sell her mother's jewelry. I told her I had money. I told her that was what money was for. Over the next 18 months, in tranches that never felt like tranches because they were always tied to something specific and visible, I wired approximately $140,000 into the joint account she had set up at a Vietnamese bank in the city. The account was in her name. I was, she had explained, an authorized signatory. I understood this at the time to be the equivalent of a joint account. It is not. It is not the same thing at all. In Vietnamese banking, an authorized signatory can withdraw funds with permission but has no ownership stake in the account. This is one of the many small legal facts that I would only learn later in a small office off Nguyen Huer Street in Ho Chi Minh City from a lawyer who had seen my exact face on other men before. The money paid for materials. It paid for labor. It paid for permits. It paid for what she called, with a small apologetic smile that I mistook for embarrassment, gifts to local officials who needed to sign the permits. The gifts, she said, were how things worked. I did not question this because Kevin had told me the same thing about Vietnam over a Sunday afternoon beer in Bronxville a lifetime ago. I trusted the framework Kevin had given me more than I trusted the questions in my own head, and Kevin was not lying exactly. He was just describing his own marriage, which was different from mine in ways he could not have known and I could not yet see. The guest house transformed. A 3rd floor rose. The bathrooms were tiled in a soft, clean white. A breakfast area opened on the ground floor with a proper espresso machine I had picked out myself. I rewired the whole building over the course of 6 weeks, working alongside 2 young Vietnamese electricians she had hired, teaching them, in a slow, patient way, the American code habits that had kept me alive for 39 years on Manhattan job sites. I loved that work. I want you to understand that too. I loved standing on a ladder in a building I thought was mine, teaching 2 young men who called me Chu, which is Vietnamese for uncle, and coming down the ladder at the end of the day to a wife who put a plate of grilled fish in front of me and asked me how my knee was. That was the happiest I've ever been in my life. That happiness was real, and the fact that it was built on nothing does not make the happiness itself less real. It only makes it more expensive. Nguyen Ba Thung was the lawyer. That was the name on the door. He was, Vanny explained, the husband of her cousin's cousin, and he would draw up a document that would protect me. The document was called a private notarized partnership agreement. It stated that I had contributed $140,000 to the renovation of the property, and that in the event of the dissolution of our marriage, I would be entitled to reimbursement of that contribution or an equivalent share of the property's value. I read it 3 times in the office. Thung explained it to me in slow English. It was signed. It was notarized. I put my copy in a folder in the safe, in our bedroom in the apartment upstairs. I felt like I had done the responsible thing. I felt like the guy from the American Legion who had married a Vietnamese woman and made it work. I felt like my father would have been proud of the way I was handling my affairs. What Thung did not tell me, and what I would only learn from the honest lawyer in Ho Chi Minh City much later, was that a private notarized partnership agreement in Vietnam is not enforceable against a property title. The title to the guest house was in Vanny's name. It had been in her name before the marriage. Under Vietnamese law, pre-marriage assets are not subject to community property claims. My $140,000 was, legally, a gift I had made to my wife's business. Thong knew this. Thong was a licensed lawyer. He did not lie to me. He simply drew up a document I did not understand the limits of, in a jurisdiction I did not understand the rules of, on the recommendation of a woman whose relationship to the truth I did not understand at all. Everyone in that office knew what was happening except me. I want to talk now about the emergencies, because if you have watched other stories like mine, you are waiting for them. And they came in a rhythm I will describe as precisely as I can, because the rhythm is the real thing to understand. The first emergency was her mother. This was in the 3rd year, about 8 months after the renovation was finished and the guest house was fully operational and, as she had predicted, doing much better business than before. Her mother had been diagnosed with a heart condition. She needed surgery at a hospital in Ho Chi Minh City. Vanny came to me in the apartment upstairs one evening, and she was calm and she was factual, and she said the cost was $22,000 American dollars, and she was going to sell her mother's jewelry and her own gold cross and take a loan from her brother. And I stopped her before she finished the sentence. And I said no. I said I would pay for it. I said her mother was my mother now. I meant that. She cried in a controlled way, not the theatrical crying of the movies, but a quiet, held crying of a woman who had been holding a lot for a long time. And she said she would pay me back somehow, and I said there was nothing to pay back. I wired the $22,000 to the hospital directly 2 days later. Her mother had the surgery, her mother recovered. Her mother is still alive today as far as I know. That surgery was real. That is one of the hard parts of this to sit with. Some of the money went to real things. The second emergency was Khan. He had gotten into a fight in a bar in the tourist strip, apparently over a card game, and he had broken a man's nose, and the man was threatening to press charges, and the local police were involved, and the situation could be, Vanny explained, settled for $14,000 American dollars, which would cover a payment to the injured man, a payment to certain officers, and a small payment to Khan's lawyer. I paid it. Khan was my brother-in-law. Khan had taken me to the seafood market on my 6th day in Nha Trang and refused a taxi fare. I paid the $14,000 and I did not investigate the story, and I understand now that the story was more or less true in its outlines and completely false in its meaning. Khan was a gambling addict. The bar fight had been about a gambling debt he had failed to pay. The $14,000 did not go to the injured man, or to the police, or to a lawyer in any meaningful proportion. It went to the debt. Vanny knew this. I did not. The third emergency was the niece, who was, of course, actually the daughter. Dor Thir Ngoc Mai, 21, was in beauty school in Ho Chi Minh City, studying to be a nail technician, and her tuition was due, and there was a shortfall of $9,000 American dollars. I paid it without asking any questions at all. By this point in the marriage, I was paying most of what I was asked to pay without asking any questions at all, because asking questions had come to feel, to me, like a betrayal of the trust that we had built. I understand now that this was the point of the trust that we had built. The trust was a mechanism. It was not the goal. It was the tool that let the goal happen. I have to talk about the 4th year now, because that is when my body started to fail me. And when my body started to fail me, my wife started to fail me too. And I could not see the connection at the time. My diabetes had been bad for years. I had been sloppy about it in a way that a lot of union guys of my generation are sloppy about their health, because we come up in a culture where you do not talk about your body until your body forces you to. My feet had been getting worse. In the 4th year of the marriage, I developed an ulcer on the bottom of my left foot that I ignored for 2 weeks, until Vanny found me sitting on the edge of the bed one morning trying to put on my sock and unable to bear the pain. And she took the sock off me and looked at my foot and made a small sound in her throat and drove me to Vinh Mec Nha Trang, which is a private hospital that caters to expatriates and wealthy Vietnamese and does not accept Vietnamese public insurance. I spent 4 weeks at Vinh Mec. The ulcer had gotten infected. There was talk, for 2 days, of amputating a toe. The toe was saved. The bill was $28,000 American dollars, because my American Medicare did not cover me abroad, and the expatriate policy I had bought from a company in Singapore had a diabetes exclusion I had not read carefully. Vanny sat with me for the first 2 weeks. She fed me broth from a thermos she brought from the guest house. She read to me in her steady, careful English from the Bible, which I want to note again, was a real Bible, and she believed in what she was reading, and none of that stopped what was happening. In the 3rd week, she started spending nights at the guest house because, she said, a guest was complaining about the plumbing, and she had to be there to deal with it. In the 4th week, she came less often. When she came, she was distracted. She looked at her phone more than she looked at me. I told myself she was tired. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself the woman who had cried in the arrivals hall at Cam Ranh had not disappeared. She was just carrying a lot, and she was allowed to be carrying a lot. In the 4th week of my hospital stay, Emma flew out from White Plains. She stayed for 6 days. She sat by my bed and read to me from a mystery novel she had brought in her carry-on. She met Vanny for the 2nd time. The first time had been on a video call 2 years earlier. Emma was polite. Vanny was gracious. They spoke to each other in careful, warm sentences that meant nothing. On the 5th day, Emma took me for a walk in the hospital garden, pushing me in a wheelchair because I was not yet allowed to walk on the foot, and she stopped by a bench with a view of a small ornamental pond. And she sat down and she said, "Dad." And I said, "What?" And she said, "I am not going to say anything else about this because you are a grown man and I love you. But I want you to know that something is not right, and I do not know what it is, and I trust it." And then she stood up and she pushed the wheelchair back to my room, and she never mentioned it again. I flew Emma back to the airport myself, in a taxi, 4 days after I was discharged. I hugged her at the curb. She held on to me a beat longer than she usually did. She said, "Come home whenever you want, Dad." Whenever. She got on the plane. I went back to the guest house. Vanny was at the front desk. She kissed me on the cheek and asked me how my daughter's flight was and did not wait for the answer. I want to be honest with you. From the moment Emma got on that plane, something in me had already begun to know. I did not have language for it. I did not have evidence for it. I had a feeling in the back of my throat that would not go away, and I chose over and over again for the next 6 months to swallow that feeling down. I chose it because the alternative was too expensive. The alternative meant that the wedding at the cathedral had not been what I thought. The alternative meant that the balcony conversations about our future had not been what I thought. The alternative meant that the yellow wallpaper in my mother's kitchen had been torn down for nothing. The morning I found the second phone was a Tuesday in the 5th year of the marriage. Vanny had gone out early to meet a supplier about new linens for the guest house. I was in the guest house office making coffee at the little espresso machine I had picked out 3 years earlier. There was a phone on the counter next to the register. It was not the phone she used with me. It was a slightly older phone, a model she had owned once, and I thought she had thrown away. It was plugged in and charging. The screen was lit up. A message had just come through. I want to tell you that I hesitated. I want to tell you that I thought about it for a long time and struggled with the ethics of it and eventually decided to look. That is not what happened. What happened is that I saw the screen, and I picked up the phone and I read the message. It was in Vietnamese. I opened my own phone. I opened the translation app that Vanny had taught me to use 2 years earlier when I was trying to learn a little Vietnamese to surprise her. I took a picture of the message. I let the app translate it. The message was from a man named Trevor. The message said, in language I will paraphrase because I do not want to give you the exact words, that Vanny had told him she thought the American would not last much longer, that his health was going, and that she thought she could get another 20% out of him before he figured out or gave up. She was not sure which. She was asking Trevor to be patient with her a little longer. She was telling Trevor she loved him. She was signing off with a small heart emoji and a phrase in Vietnamese that the app translated as, "My true one." I read it 3 times. I put the phone back down on the counter exactly where it had been. I unplugged my own phone. I walked out of the guest house. I walked 2 blocks to a bun cha stand on the corner. I sat down on a plastic stool. I ordered a bowl. The woman brought it to me. I did not eat it. I sat there for 4 hours. The smell of the grilled pork, which for 4 years had been the smell of my new life, made me sick for the first time. I did not confront her that day. I did not confront her that week. I want to tell you why. Because if you are watching this, and you are in something like what I was in, you may find this the most useful part of what I have to say. I did not confront her because I understood, sitting on that plastic stool, that if I confronted her, I would lose whatever leverage I still had. I understood that she had been running this longer than I had known her. I understood that Trevor was not the beginning, and I was not the end. I understood, without having any of the details yet, that whatever was in her name was going to stay in her name, and whatever was in my name was probably not much, and that the version of me who walked into the guest house office an hour before with a fresh cup of coffee was already gone, and there was a new version of me now, and the new version of me had to be smarter than the old version. The old version had trusted her. The new version had 4 hours on a plastic stool to become someone else. I went to Ho Chi Minh City the next week. I told her I had to see a doctor at a hospital there for a follow-up on my foot. She kissed me at the taxi and told me to come home safe. I got in the taxi. I did not look back. Phan De Quoi's office was on the 4th floor of an old French colonial building off Nguyen Huer Street, up a narrow staircase with a wrought iron banister, and past a door with his name on it in gold letters. He was in his 50s, thin, in a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, no jacket. He shook my hand and offered me a coffee and sat me down in a chair across from his desk. I had brought copies of everything: the marriage certificate, the private notarized partnership agreement Thung had drawn up, the bank statements from the joint account, the wire receipts for the money I had sent, for the renovation, and for the emergencies. He put on a pair of reading glasses. He read for a long time. He did not say anything while he read. When he finished, he took off the glasses and he set them on the desk and he looked at me and he said, "In gentle, precise English, Mr. Delahaye, I want to tell you the truth. It is going to be difficult to hear." I nodded. I said, "That is why I came." He said, "The guest house is your wife's. It was hers before the marriage. Under Vietnamese law, premarital property is not community property. Your renovation is legally considered a gift to her business. The private agreement Mr. Thung drew up is not enforceable against the property title. It could theoretically support a claim for reimbursement, but Vietnamese civil courts are slow and the case would take between 18 and 30 months, and legal fees over that time would run between 40 and 60,000 American dollars, and the likely outcome is a settlement offer that would be a fraction of your contribution. The bank account, which you believed was joint, is actually solely hers. You are an authorized signatory. That is not ownership. Any funds still in the account are hers." I said, "What is likely still in the account?" He said, "I would guess that any funds you have wired in have already been moved out. I would guess this because it is what I would do if I were her. I would guess this because it is what I have seen in other cases like yours. I am telling you honestly, Mr. Delahaye, you are the 4th American man to sit in this chair this year with a story that has these same shapes." I sat with that for a moment. I asked him what he would recommend. He said, "I would recommend that you do not go back to the guest house. I would recommend that you stay in a hotel in this city. I would recommend that I contact her lawyer on your behalf and request a buyout. I would recommend that you accept whatever she offers within reason, because whatever she offers will be more than you will get by fighting. I would recommend that you fly home to New York and begin the process of rebuilding whatever can still be rebuilt. I would recommend, Mr. Delahaye, that you forgive yourself, because the men who cannot forgive themselves do not recover." The buyout came 3 weeks later. It was 40,000 American dollars. She offered it through Thung, who had somehow become her lawyer in the negotiation and was, Hua gently confirmed for me, her lawyer all along. I signed the papers in Hua's office. Vanny was not there. She had signed her copy in Nha Trang. I read every line of the settlement. I read the divorce papers. I signed everything. I did not cry in the office. I shook Hua's hand. I walked down the 4 flights of stairs. I got into a taxi. In the taxi going down Warren Ware Street toward the river, I cried in the way I have not cried since my father died. The driver said nothing. The driver had probably driven other men through this exact fare. I flew home to New York a week later. Emma picked me up at JFK. She did not say anything when she saw me. She hugged me. She drove me back to White Plains. She had made up the guest room in the basement. There is a small window that looks out onto her yard where my grandson's bicycles lie tipped over in the grass. That is the window I look out of now when I wake up at 4 in the morning, which I still do, out of a habit from a life I no longer live. I want to tell you what I know now that I did not know then, because if you have watched this far, you deserve to have the shape of it in one piece. Vanny had been running relationships with Western men in staggered phases for years. When I met her at the cafe near the Ponagar Towers, she was in the process of phasing out a 62-year-old man from Blackpool named Nigel, who had already lost approximately 90,000 pounds and would leave Vietnam quietly 6 months later without ever telling his family the full amount. I met Nigel through an expatriate Facebook group after I got back to New York. We spoke on the phone for 2 hours. He told me his story. I told him mine. We cried, both of us, in that useless, grateful way men our age cry when we finally find another man who has been through the same thing. Trevor Michael Roundtree, from Melbourne, 64, retired plumber, was the man in the text message. He was in the committed boyfriend sending remittances phase while I was being phased out. He did not know I existed. I sent him a message on Facebook 6 months after I got back to New York. I told him what she was. He did not answer for 2 weeks. Then he answered with a single line, "Thank you, mate." He blocked me after that. I understood. Dor Thier Ngoc Mai, the niece, was in fact Vanny's daughter from a first marriage to a Vietnamese motorbike mechanic who had left when the girl was 6. The mechanic was not dead. There had been no engineer. There had been no accident on Highway 1. Mai, who worked as a nail technician in Ho Chi Minh City, had sent me an email in the 3rd year of my marriage from an anonymous account. The email had said in halting English, "Please be careful with my mother." I had assumed it was spam. I had deleted it without reading it twice. I remembered it later, sitting in Emma's basement, and I remembered it exactly, and I understood that a 21-year-old girl I had never met had tried, in the only way she knew how, to save me, and I had thrown it away. Dor Min Khan, the brother, was a gambling addict who had laundered a portion of the extracted money through a faux restaurant he did not really own. Win Ba Thung, the lawyer, had not lied to me, but had drawn up a document he knew would not protect me, in a country whose laws he understood and I did not. Vanny's mother, whose heart surgery had been real, is still alive. Her father, the drunk fisherman, is still alive. The gold cross Vanny wore at her throat, that I had noticed on our first meeting at the cafe, had been a gift from Nigel of Blackpool. She wore it through our entire marriage. I had touched it many times. I had not known. Kevin Ashby, my Legion buddy who had shown me the pictures on his phone in Bronxville, is still married to his wife from Cun Tha. Their marriage is, as far as I can tell, a happy one. I do not blame Kevin. I sat down with Kevin at the Legion post 2 months after I got back and I told him what had happened in a shortened version, and he cried into his beer and apologized to me. I told him it was not his fault. I told him he had been describing his marriage, not mine. He kept apologizing anyway. That is what my people do. That is also, I understand now, the exact quality in me that made me easy to take. Being other people's people and expecting them to be mine is the disease that took me to Vietnam and the disease that let her keep me there. Emma has never once said I told you so. She has been better to me in this than I deserved. She lets me babysit the boys on Saturdays. She makes me go to the endocrinologist. She has helped me open a small account with the $40,000 from the buyout and what was left in the American account I had, thank God. Kept separate the way she had asked me to that afternoon on the floor of my parents' empty bedroom, which was about $30,000. I have $70,000 to my name at 68 years old. I have a pension and Social Security, which together are enough to live on if I do not have to pay rent, which I do not, because Emma will not let me. I have a granddaughter now, born a year after I got back. Her name is Josephine. She is named after my mother. I want to close by telling you the thing I sat with the longest, which is the thing about destruction versus theft. I did not lose that money in a scam. Not really. I lost it in a marriage. A scam is something a stranger does to you. What Vanny did to me was closer to what a bad marriage does over a lifetime, except she compressed it into 5 years, and she did it on purpose. She stood next to me the whole time. She did not steal from me. She spent our money that was actually just my money, on things we were building together, that were actually just things she was building alone. The difference matters, because a theft leaves you feeling foolish and a destruction leaves you feeling used, and used is a much longer road to walk back from than foolish. The yellow wallpaper in the kitchen in Park Hill was torn down by the new owners a month after I left New York. I know this because I drove past the house last winter with Emma at the wheel, and the front porch light was a different color, and Emma slowed down without me asking her to, and we sat at the curb for a minute, and I looked at the window of what had been my mother's kitchen, and there were new curtains, and I could not see the wall, but I knew. I did not cry. Emma took my hand. She did not say anything. She drove me back to White Plains. If you are watching this, and you are 65, and you are alone in a kitchen that has become a museum, please hear me. The way out of that kitchen is not through a beach in another country. The way out is through the people in your life who have earned the right to worry about you. Call your daughter. Call your son. Call the guy you have not called in 10 years because you had a stupid fight about nothing. Do not sell the house. Do not wire the money. Do not marry the woman at the cafe with the book, no matter how beautiful her English is, no matter how gently she asks about your knee. If she is real, she will still be there in a year. If she is not real, a year is what it will take you to see it. I am Jack Warren Delahaye. I am 68. I live in my daughter's basement in White Plains, New York. I babysit my granddaughter on Saturdays. I have made my peace, mostly, with the fact that the house my father bought in 1968 is now owned by strangers, and the guest house I renovated in Nha Trang is now owned by a woman who is, as I speak, somewhere in the arrivals hall at Cam Ranh Airport, meeting a man who thinks he is home. If this story has helped you see something you needed to see, please subscribe. There are more of these than any of us want to believe. And the only thing that costs the people running them anything at all is when the men who survive them finally start telling the truth about what happened. I did not tell this to shame myself. I told it because Nigel in Blackpool told me his, and it saved my life. If mine saves yours, then the yellow wallpaper was not torn down for nothing after all.